to the deeper changes, whether we call it the climate change, the air pollution issues, the larger sustainability agenda, that we are increasingly becoming conscious of the fact that how the planning, urban planning, will have to be central to the range of solutions that we are looking for. And therefore, from that perspective, we are very keen to have this conversation with you, that we not as an urban planner, but someone from that larger sustainability sector, that how do we perceive the kind of interventions that we are looking for that are going to change the agenda and the terms for moving forward. So to begin by saying, and which often becomes the mandatory slide changing. Okay. So the mandatory point that we always begin with is that the whole challenge of that and very recently when we were all in the COP27, we understood where it was highlighted that how cities have become central to the whole challenge. And increasingly what IPCC is telling us, that the whole growth story unfolding in cities today, the way it is making cities more vulnerable, it is where we are going to see the extreme hazards emerging, making cities, the communities vulnerable. And therefore, both for mitigation and adaptation, the strategies will have to be designed very critically to be able to build resilience. Now, at the same time, we know that that cities responding to that when you're talking about the changing and the transition in cities, keeping in mind that cities are also going to contribute enormously to the economy. And in India, what we are talking about, that it is expected that cities are expected to produce about 75% of the GDP, and that will be nearly 40% of India's rapidly growing carbon emissions are urban emissions. Therefore, if we have to deal with this challenge, we really need to understand the pathways and how to influence those pathways. Next, can we change? It's not. Cities are at the same time. I have to change it quickly. Can I? Okay. So while the cities themselves, and we are looking at these smart cities today, which are where we are beginning to see that even their carbon footprint is expanding because of the rising emissions. But as you can also see here, when we begin to map the vulnerability and the hazards in the city in terms of extreme weather events, as you can see here, each and every city has a challenge of Each and every city has a challenge, and this is the kind of mapping that you see here on the map, that whether in terms of extreme rainfalls, rainfall trend, extreme temperature, it's each and every city is hugely vulnerable with the complexity of the challenge. Now, while it is a question of mitigation, but we also know that cities themselves are victim of climate change. And that is not just because the climate is changing and extreme weather events are becoming more intense, but it is also because the way the development is happening, the way interventions are being made, intervening into and disrupting the whole ecological limit and the determinants of a city. That itself is another yet lesson for our thing to be looking at. While this is climate change, at the same time, we know there is also the whole air pollution challenge that we are looking at, each and every state so much vulnerable. Now, having said that, so we know the whole strategy, the whole concern, the landscape, the way that is evolving in this country. So here, therefore, the connection that we would like to make is that how do we therefore make that connection between urban planning and the solutions that we are looking for, the clean air and public health, for thermal comfort in cities, for circularity, for resource efficiency and sufficiency, to reduce energy intensity of urban growth, climate resilience, to have inclusive and equitous access, and at the same time, reshaping space for the new generation solutions that have become our new mandate. So from that perspective, I quickly just run over that what are those larger connections that we are making with the planning and the solutions we are looking for. First of all, it is the new understanding of the whole environmental challenge is somewhere now challenging us to understand the space as a unit for planning. I mean, conventionally, we were so focused on the municipal limit to talk about the urban planning agenda. But when we are now looking forward to and mapping the hazards, the challenges, whether that's air pollution, whether that is climate, the spatial pattern of that change is becoming increasingly more sharper and clearer to us, whether it's terms of spatial mapping of pollution or whether it's even going down to what we are calling today and where the governments in the cities are now mandated to do is how to develop their hyper local action plan. And therefore, imagine a city like Jaipur, which is now divided into 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer grid. And for each grid, you are actually mapping out the local pollution sources, starting from industrial sources to vehicles, transport, waste, and then finding absolutely hyperlocal solution. That's one huge big challenge that is coming up today in this country, but where they have to do this. But at the same time, the bigger understanding and the newer science that has now come, it is also challenging us to say that it is not enough to find solutions that is only locally appropriate for within the municipal boundary of a city. But try and understand that if it is a pollution problem, pollution don't remain confined to a municipal limit, but it blows. And therefore, the whole larger airshed management regional approach to change. So therefore, when you look at just not Delhi during for pollution, but the across NCR and beyond, and all the region together becoming and there's polluted together, and now there is enough number crunching to show how different regions are contributing to pollution. Now, how do you make that part of the larger integrated planning, which is from the hyperlocal to city to the larger regional? His entire Indo-Gangetic plain will have to be addressed through that integrated planning. And because of this, what we know is that the National Urban Clean Air Program has now taken that on board, and they're looking at that how that comprehensive integrated at a regional level is possible, where you establish responsibility of the upwind polluting state and the downwind states, and build that accountability in the clean air action plans, in the state level action plans. In fact, the very recent plan that we got for the Delhi NCR is the first blueprint where you are actually taking the whole region and then planning for each and every strategy and taking into account the challenges of the mega city in the region as well as a small town in the region. Now, these are the new challenges for us, and we have to build for this. Now, the other connection that we are making very quickly is also that when you begin to understand the climate change and we start mapping that with climate change, how in each and every city, we begin to change these parameters like the heat map that are beginning to emerge, how the heat is changing on a typical day across the city, and which is very, the insight that you get there is that how the heat map is hugely influenced by the blue and the green and the whole barren landscape and the concrete. Now, once you have this kind of mapping, how do you then begin to use that for your deeper planning that is now has become the new challenge and the mandate? So when you're looking at the Delhi or you're looking at the Mumbai, it's so clear that where is the hot spots and where is the colder spots, and therefore the whole planning that will have to be integrated within that to take care of it. And we know that in that heat generation, there is a waste heat coming from the air conditioners, from the vehicles, the concrete, the trapping of the heat, and therefore how does that become the attribute? So this is what we are really looking at, and we want to change the whole strategy for it. So therefore, when we started looking into those and what does that mean, there is whole debate and the discourse evolving around that how buildings will have to be designed for thermal comfort. But when we looked deeper into it, we also started to understand that it's just not the building in itself and an individual building trying to meet the regulatory requirements of the energy efficiency, but how is overall thermal comfort is actually influenced by the larger habitat and the interface, the clustering of the building, and therefore all of that will have to be taken into account. Without that, as you can see here, when we start looking at the electricity consumption pattern in the city by the hour during summer, we realize that without thermal comfort, how energy consumption in the city can go completely off mark and completely change. And this is what is going to affect us so deeply. The third connection that we want to make, and when we are looking for the urban planning solution, that the whole idea that that we can have all these marginal periphery land in our cities, which we can just treat them as the wasteland and use them for dumping of the waste. But today, now, when new mandate is emerging in the city that know that the circularity will have to be the central to the change, then you begin to understand that the how planning process therefore has to reshape the space in the city where you do not use waste for dumping, but you design your city for the material recovery and the infrastructure that you need to create across the city so that you can finally reclaim the land that you have been using to be able to put into productive use. And it's fascinating to see that how good examples are emerging across the country today, but this has to become the mainstream. But this also means that while you are remediating legacy waste to reclaim the land and planning for it, the whole material recovery design and the waste flow design will also have to ensure that you're moving forward towards a zero landfill policy, and that's the planning we need. So therefore, the whole challenge of mapping the waste flow in the city of all kinds of waste streams, whether that's municipal solid waste or whether the construction and demolition waste, or if you are looking at the whole mapping of the construction and the huge challenge of planning that we now can see that the leveraging of the new database emerging around the construction sites, how that can be used and leveraged for better planning and to ensure that in a city after city, we are able to quantify better, understand the spatial breadth, understand that how do we want to do better planning for it. At the same time, to also understand that nothing is a waste land, that what you consider the backyard of the city, the most unproductive land that you just let go waste. But in this whole idea of recovering the whole resource benefit of using each and every space in our city will have to be made absolutely central to the whole change that you are looking for, that even that the wasted space, the backyard, then becomes the whole usable, productive, and it also brings in the resource efficiency that is needed. The final two segments that I just want to quickly touch upon, that another big challenge that we are beginning to see in our city, and that requires very urgent change in our thing to understand that how we are shaping our cities, how we are the whole compact city, reducing distances, the IPCC talking about the whole challenge of reducing distances, compact city development, but keeping in mind that when we start to map that how the new development is happening, redevelopment is happening, this is something that we all know. But when you go city after city, looking at the way the spatial spread of cities happening, mostly outside this municipal limit, without much challenge, the resources and the planning ability to be able to link the livelihood, welfare planning, and the spin-offs that are needed accordingly, and the whole inclusive and the equity impact of change. But at the same time, when you look at all the solutions emerging today in the city, and this is one of the biggest challenge for our low carbon growth. And is this solvable? And this is the question that we are asking continuously today to be able to understand that how do we take this forward? We never try to understand impact of motorization also as a land impact. Imagine a city like Delhi with 23% of its land area under road network, and yet another 10% given away to meet the demand for parking. It's about 1/3 of the land, precious land given away only for the vehicles. And how do we therefore change that paradigm when the demand from that motorization is going beyond what is the urbanizable space in the city? So this is emerging city after city, even like in Kolkata, just with 1% open space left, or understand that what is the whole the land demand for the motorization. That's the kind of challenge that we're looking for. But here again, when we globally and nationally, we understand that how where the investments need to be, where the planning strategy needs to be, But it's very scary and it's worrying that even the post-pandemic recovery that UNEP has talked about, and that even the new investment for recovery is more towards it is the vehicle-centric infrastructure planning, but not the people-centric. So, but yet we all keep talking about the advantages of India, that in the huge strength that we have in our baseline, and that still the majority walking, cycling, using public transport, but all the data that is there is just showing that how this is going to slide terribly, and it's all going to change in the future because of our poor investments in the public transport. The whole investment in mass transit today in this country has actually plateaued. It is not expanding. There is no spin-off across the cities, and therefore we have to understand how do we change that, because with this kind of investments and where is the whole car-centric design, I'm not going to go into the detail, but just to say that this kind of engineering changes once made, it is not easily reversible. So we have to be careful right from the beginning that if we are really looking for the kind of compact city development, then the new development cannot be supersized blocks and opaque boundary walls and all that. But we understand that the reshaping for change is possible, and it is happening in different cities of India. These are the examples from different cities of India, which is doable, and it is fascinating to see that today Bhubaneswar, the smart city, one of the most transformative changes we are beginning to see here. And what the challenge for us is that there are so many examples around the cities today, but they are still very small, little, pretty, and they are still not scalable. And at the same time, therefore, we have to understand that when we are dealing with the street, that how comprehensive approach is needed. So in Bhubaneswar today, when you are seeing fantastic walkways, cycleways being built, but because we have not taken care of each and every aspect of the street usage, then this kind of becomes a challenge. And therefore, the whole area planning approach to organize the space for each and every activity, whether that's the vehicles, whether there's walkers, cycling, the parking, it's happening in small pilots, but not being maintained the way the original pilots were planned. But keeping in mind, and that's, even in a mega city like Delhi, where the master plan is saying that once you have the full length of the metro and in place, about 60% of urban areas will be within 15 minutes walking distance from the MRTs, and that there's a possibility that the majority will be within 400 meters of the metro station. But that is a powerful opportunity which we have not yet leveraged, and this is the whole localized change that you now require in the city is going to be absolutely critical for us to understand that how do we take that forward, because both cannot happen together, that you want transit-oriented, accessible, TOD-oriented development, but at the same time you promote gated development. Some typologies around TOD are changing, but again, not scalable. So my final concluding segment is that when I'm just touching upon very quickly all the different aspects where we are making the connection between environmental solutions and the urban planning approaches that are needed today so urgently, that also understand that with climate change and clean air action, a lot of new generation action and solutions are now going to get implemented in our cities, and that are going to create new demand for urban planning. First of all, everyone talks about electrification today, the whole zero emission transition and electric vehicles. But have you ever understood that when you have to begin to set up a network of charging stations in your city, how that completely transforms the way you would otherwise do your petrol pumps in the city? And therefore, you look at that kind of a change and the whole network development. And the low emission zone that is now becoming part of the new mantra and the new strategy in our Clean Air Action Plan. This is Bhubaneswar near Lingaraj Temple, where they are now planning to create a low emission zones about 800 meter around it. And these are the new generation, the strategies that will now get implemented where you regulate movement. And the third area is the whole designing for climate resilience, where you're leveraging the circulation network for water sensitive design. So it's just to give a very quick glimpse of that, how different ways, my last slide to say that we now have to begin to reimagine the city and reinvent our inclusive cities. And this will certainly require the cities to need to be the new urban agenda, that we now need to, the mandate for designing cities differently, where you are reducing the energy intensity and at the same time we are also making them more resource efficient and reducing the impacts while meeting the welfare and the livelihood requirements of everyone to have an inclusive strategy for everyone. The fiscal reforms that is needed for that, the urban adaptation agenda, and we need that whole just urban transition and adopt measurable and verifiable impact of monitoring systems. Now that has to be our non-negotiable, the new urban agenda for the future to deal with the emerging crisis. Thank you very much.